Europe was not built only by kings, armies, banks, ships, or factories. It was also built by something dirty, ugly, and easy to ignore. A root pulled from the ground. A crop that many Europeans first mistrusted. A food that looked too humble to change history. The potato did not arrive in Europe like a conquering army. It arrived quietly, carried across the Atlantic after Spanish contact with the Andes. At first it was strange. It grew underground. It belonged to a family of plants Europeans already associated with poison. In some places it was treated as animal feed, in others as emergency food for the poor. But the potato had a hidden power. It could turn small plots into dense calories. It could grow where grain struggled. It could feed families on land that looked too poor to matter. It did not need a mill. It did not need expensive processing. It could be planted in gardens, fields, highlands, wet soil, cold places, and marginal land that did not easily fit the old grain economy. That made it more than food. It made it a demographic machine. Over time, the potato helped Europe feed more people, grow larger towns, support industrial workers, sustain armies, and survive years when grain harvests failed. But the same crop that gave Europe new strength also revealed a terrifying weakness. When millions of people depend on one food and that food fails, the disaster is not just agricultural. It becomes political. It becomes social. It becomes historical. This is not simply the history of the potato. This is the story of how one Andean crop crossed the ocean, entered European fields, fed the poor, strengthened states, fueled population growth, and helped build the modern world. The potato did not look powerful. That was the point. Before the potato became European, it was Andean. For thousands of years before Europeans saw it, people in the highlands of South America had already done the hard work. They selected it, improved it, preserved it, learned where it grew best, learned which varieties survived frost, altitude, poor soil, and dangerous weather. The Andes were not an easy laboratory. Fields climbed into thin air. Temperatures could swing violently between day and night. Rain, frost, drought, and altitude made farming difficult. Yet Andean societies turned that harsh landscape into one of the world's great centers of agricultural innovation. The potato was part of that achievement. It was not one simple crop. It was a world of varieties, different shapes, colors, textures, and uses. Some could grow high in the mountains, some resisted cold, some were bitter unless processed correctly. Some could be preserved. One of the most important Andean innovations was chuño. Potatoes freeze-dried by the natural cold of the mountains and the heat of the sun. Farmers could spread potatoes outside at night, let them freeze, thaw them in daylight, press out water, and create a food that could be stored for years. That mattered because storage is power. A crop that rots quickly feeds today. A crop that can be stored feeds tomorrow's army, tomorrow's village, tomorrow's bad harvest, tomorrow's empire. Long before European peasants depended on potatoes, Andean peoples had already understood their deeper value. The potato was not just something to eat, it was a survival system. When Europeans later carried potatoes across the Atlantic, they were not carrying a wild curiosity. They were carrying the result of generations of indigenous experimentation. Modern Europe did not invent the potato, it inherited a technology. And like many inherited technologies, Europeans did not immediately understand what they had. The potato entered Europe in the 16th century, but arrival is not the same thing as adoption. European farmers did not instantly look at this strange tuber and decide to rebuild their food systems around it. Many people distrusted it. It came from the Americas, it grew underground. It was not mentioned in the Bible. It had leaves and berries that could be toxic. It did not fit familiar ideas of proper bread, grain, or respectable food. In some regions, it was grown as a botanical curiosity. In others, it was used for animals or fed to people only when nothing better was available. This is one of the reasons the potato story is so useful. History does not always change because people recognize progress immediately. Sometimes the useful thing is ignored until hunger makes it impossible to ignore. Europe's old food system was built heavily around grain. Grain was valuable because it could be taxed, stored, transported, milled, sold, and controlled. Bread was not just food, it was politics. When grain prices rose, cities panicked. When harvests failed, governments shook. When bread became too expensive, crowds could turn into riots. The potato entered this world as an outsider. It did not move through the economy like grain. It was bulky. It was often consumed locally. It could be grown in small plots. It could remain hidden underground until needed. It was harder for tax collectors and armies to seize than fields of standing grain. That made it attractive to the poor before it became respectable to the powerful. Peasants and laborers did not need a philosophical argument for the potato. They needed food that worked, a crop that could feed children from a small patch of land, a crop that gave calories without a miller, baker, landlord, or merchant taking a cut at every stage. Eventually, states began to notice. In parts of Europe, rulers, officials, doctors, and agricultural reformers promoted potatoes because they saw what the crop could do: reduce famine, feed soldiers, and strengthen populations. But the potato's real conquest was not a royal decree, it was repetition. Season after season, household after household, garden after garden, people learned that the ugly crop could keep them alive. The potato changed Europe because it solved a brutal problem. How do you feed more people from the same land? For most of history, population pressed against food supply. More people meant more mouths. More mouths required more fields, but land was limited and much of it was not ideal for grain. Bad weather, poor soil, war, disease, taxes, and landlord pressure could all turn ordinary life into hunger. The potato did not remove these problems, it changed the calculation. A field of potatoes could produce a large amount of food from a small area. It could grow in cooler climates. It could do well in soils where grain performed badly. It provided calories, vitamin C, potassium, and enough nourishment that people could survive on diets that would have been harder with grain alone. For poor rural families, that was revolutionary. A tiny plot could become a food supply. A garden could matter. Marginal land could matter. Highland land could matter. Land that did not produce enough wheat to support a family might still produce enough potatoes to keep children alive. This is why the potato mattered far beyond the dinner table. If more children survive, population rises. If rural families need less land to feed themselves, labor can move. If workers can eat cheaply, factories can hire them. If towns can be fed, cities can grow. If armies can be provisioned, states can fight longer. This does not mean the potato single-handedly created modern Europe. That would be too simple. Coal mattered, machines mattered, colonies mattered, finance mattered. Governments, violence, trade, and empire all mattered. But food is the base layer. An economy cannot industrialize if people cannot eat. A state cannot expand if its population collapses. A city cannot grow if its workers starve. The potato made survival cheaper in many parts of Europe. That changed what was possible. It helped turn poverty into labor supply. It helped turn small plots into population growth. It helped turn marginal land into human energy. That is why this crop belongs in the history of factories, armies, migration, cities, and empire. Not because it looked dramatic, because it quietly changed the numbers underneath everything. Nowhere shows the potato's power more clearly than Ireland. Ireland did not adopt the potato as a fashionable food, it adopted it because the potato fit a hard social reality. Many poor families lived with little land, little security, and few options. Grain and cattle often served markets and landlords. The rural poor needed something that could feed a household from a small patch of soil. The potato did that. Combined with milk, potatoes could sustain a family on a diet that was monotonous but nutritionally effective. A small plot could feed people in a way that grain could not. For landless laborers and poor tenants, this was not a culinary choice. It was survival mathematics. The result was extraordinary. Ireland's population grew rapidly. More people could live on less land. More families could form. more children could survive. The potato made poverty survivable enough for population to rise. This is the dangerous part of the story. A crop can make a society stronger while also making it more fragile. The same efficiency that allowed families to live on small plots also allowed landlords and political systems to tolerate extreme poverty. If people could survive on potatoes, then the structure around them did not need to become fairer. If a family could be kept alive on a tiny piece of land, then land hunger, dependence, and inequality could deepen. The potato did not create Irish poverty. It made Irish poverty more survivable. For a time. That distinction matters because when a food system becomes dependent on one crop, survival can look stable right up until the moment it collapses. In Ireland, the potato was proof of abundance and proof of vulnerability at the same time. It fed millions. It also made millions dangerously exposed to a single failure. In the 1840s, late blight reached European potato fields. To a farmer, the effect was horrifying. Leaves darkened, plants sickened, tubers that looked edible could rot into a foul mass. A field that had promised survival could become useless in days. Across parts of Europe, the disease caused severe damage. In Ireland, it became catastrophe. The reason was not simply that a plant disease appeared. Plant diseases had appeared before. Harvests had failed before. The deeper problem was dependence. Millions of poor people relied heavily on the potato, and often on vulnerable varieties, inside a political and economic system that gave them little protection. When the potato failed, the failure moved through society. Hunger weakened bodies. Disease spread through people already starving. Families lost rent, land, and shelter. People entered workhouses, roads, ports, and ships. Death and emigration reshaped Ireland for generations. The Great Famine was one of the clearest warnings in modern history. A food system can be productive and still be fragile. Efficiency can hide danger, dependence can disguise itself as success. The potato had helped Ireland support a large population. Then the collapse of that crop helped reveal how little security many of those people truly had. This is why the potato's history cannot be told only as progress. It is also a story about risk. The same crop that helped Europe grow also showed how dangerous it was to build human survival on narrow biological foundations. Too few varieties, too little resilience, too much poverty, too much dependence. The potato fed modern Europe. In Ireland, it also exposed the cost of a society that mistook survival for stability. By the 19th century, the potato had become part of Europe's modern transformation. It was in cottages, fields, markets, armies, factories, and cities. It helped feed workers in industrial regions. It helped sustain population growth. It helped reduce the pressure created by grain failures. It entered state planning, peasant gardens, poor households, and eventually respectable kitchens. Its influence was quiet because food usually is. People remember battles because battles make noise. They remember kings because kings leave statues. They remember machines because machines look modern. But before a worker can enter a factory, someone has to feed him. Before a city can grow, food has to arrive. Before an army can march, calories must exist somewhere. The potato mattered because it changed the hidden arithmetic of life. How many people could survive, where they could live, how cheaply they could eat, and how much labor a society could support. It did not build modern Europe alone, but modern Europe would have looked very different without it. And the strangest part is that Europe's powerful states depended on a crop they did not create. The potato came from Andean knowledge, crossed the Atlantic through conquest and exchange, entered Europe slowly, fed the poor first, strengthened populations, supported industry, and then revealed the catastrophic risk of biological dependence. That is why the potato deserves a place beside iron, coal, steam, ships, banks, and armies. It was not just food, it was infrastructure. It was stored energy. It was survival compressed into the soil. The crop that many Europeans once feared became one of the foundations of the modern world. The potato built modern Europe from below. If you found this hidden version of history useful, subscribe. More documentaries are coming about the ordinary things that changed the world because people underestimated them.